Hi everyone, my name is Ivona and I'm a development director at EA. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about how we made FC26 more accessible. So this all started not really with a grand strategy, but really a simple moment of connection back in February of 2024. I attended a learning session led by Morgan Baker, who some of you may know, and I was in awe, not just of her deep knowledge and expertise in accessibility within the gaming industry, but also of her passion. And afterwards, we connected, and together we asked, why aren't we doing more for accessibility in FC? And that exchange lit a spark. It wasn't an official project, it wasn't on any roadmap. It was simply a recognition that this mattered, and it wasn't going to happen unless someone leaned in. So after that spark in February, the question became, how do we turn this into something real? And the first step was getting the space to try. We worked on convincing senior leadership to let us hold workshops. We thought this was the first step to give space to this initiative and share knowledge about accessibility. And to their credit, they didn't shut it down, they gave us room. Not a mandate, not a budget line, just enough space to do our thing. Honestly, felt a little bit like one of those ask for forgiveness later moments. So we organized the first accessibility design workshops. It wasn't a small lift. We are asking designers, producers, QA, and software engineers across FC to step out of their regular work. We're asking for 2 full days right in the middle of finaling, and that's a really big ask. But here's what made it truly inspiring. We brought in players with disabilities for the workshops, real people who actually play our game, and they gave direct feedback to the team. Seeing someone navigate a menu or struggle with a mechanic we thought was simple hit differently. And when players shared how a small change can mean the difference between being excluded or fully included, you could feel the room shift. And importantly, we treated these players as experts. We paid our disability consultants for their time and insights, just as we would any other expert guiding our development process. And that principle really mattered. With the feedback and the educational component of the workshops, the attendees got to work at really breaking down everything they heard and how it could apply in FC. And the feedback from our devs told the same story. After the workshops, 88% of attendees said they would highly recommend the experience to their peers, and 96% said that hearing directly from players with disabilities was highly insightful, that it enhanced their understanding of accessibility challenges within FC. Those 2 days didn't just produce ideas, they united the group. They showed us measurably the difference this work could make for our players. And that's what turned momentum into movement. Those workshops proved something important. Accessibility wasn't just a good idea, it was possible, it was practical, and it was inspiring. Once people experienced that energy, the word spread. Someone would leave a workshop and tell a colleague, you need to be a part of this. Designers told other designers, engineers told other engineers, and before long, we had a growing circle of people across FC who wanted in. And that's how our accessibility champs were born. What started with 2 people back in February of 2024 quickly became 10, then 20, then 50. 50 champs across design, engineering, QA, and production, all volunteering time to learn, share, and advocate for accessibility. It really felt like a ripple spreading outward until accessibility was part of conversations it had never been in before. And that visibility began to change how we build features. Accessibility stopped being an afterthought and started becoming a checkpoint in development. When a new feature was on the table, teams would ask, does this take accessibility into account? And sometimes the answer wasn't just about making a feature accessible. The feature itself became an accessibility improvement. A great example is the high contrast mode that Paul will talk about in a little bit. At the same time, we started building the infrastructure around this movement. We created the FC Accessibility Hub, which is an internal centralized resource with tools, best practices, player feedback, and research insights. We have the Accessibility Design Council, which brings in community accessibility advocates for exclusive feedback sessions across all of our game modes. And we have the EA's accessibility tools like Iris and Fontic, which makes sure our games are safer and more inclusive from the ground up. So today, it's not just a few passionate people or a handful of workshops. It's a champion program, it's accessibility baked into our features, and it's a growing ecosystem that keeps accessibility at the center of how we build. So let's talk a little bit about our framework and where we are. So this framework shows how we see accessibility as a journey and not a single milestone. Knowledge is really the foundation. We're always learning, building awareness, and sharing understanding across teams. From there, we began exploring opportunities and tools, experimenting to see what was possible, and really establishing foundation of knowledge, which our workshops were stepping stones to this. The next step is integration. So making accessibility a core part of development so it's no longer a side conversation, but a part of how we build. As we go into our second cycle, we are hoping to see this evolution. As we mature, the focus shifts to consistency and scale, so players experience accessibility across the board. And in the future, the goal is leadership, not just practicing accessibility ourselves, but innovating, advocating, and inspiring others in the industry. This is a patient process. We don't expect to lead on day one, but by moving step by step, we're building towards that future. Thank you, and now I'll pass it over to Paul.
Hi, folks. My name is Paul Parsons, and I should probably start by saying that I'm not an accessibility expert like Morgan, or someone with the vision to create a whole accessibility initiative like Ivona. What I am is one of the people who attended a workshop that they created and was profoundly affected by the experience. So my area of expertise is gameplay, essentially everything that happens between the whistles in our game, and we take the player experience very seriously. So having people from the disabled community come up to us and say quite clearly that not only are we not getting the job done, but we're falling way short of the mark was tough to hear. Fortunately, while I'm not an expert in accessibility or creating internal programs, I am one of the people who helps create and define the feature set each year. So once the Accessibility Champs group was created and it identified a feature set that they believed was achievable for FC26, one of my gameplay designers, Santiago Sotomayor, offered to write a feature brief that could then get moving through the system. It was a bit of an odd one because accessibility isn't just about one game area. It touches the whole product, front-end presentation, rendering, gameplay, UXR, and more. And in that list, gameplay was by far the smallest component when it comes to who would actually be building the features. But accessibility needed a home. It needed to have an actual feature owner who could be a hub for all the spokes. Now, I think that this was key to our features becoming a reality. And in fact, I think it's one of the reasons why a game at a large studio can sometimes stumble when it comes to accessibility features. Accessibility doesn't fit into one of the neat pre-existing boxes that define the rest of the game. So you have to make a box for it if you want to take it seriously. And so by having that central feature brief within one of the existing teams at the studio, we were able to plug it into the existing machinery that allows an annual sports title to operate. Now I could advocate it for it. Teams could schedule against it, and it could move from grassroots initiative to a proper feature that fit within our development framework. Now you've probably noticed that I titled my section High Contrast Mode, but have been talking about features in plural. That's partially because we had some other improvements we put in, such as the ability to toggle on and off the backing video in the main menu, the addition of accessibility options in the initial boot flow, and a setting that simplifies the inputs necessary to utilize skill moves. But there are also other things we put in that are specific to the visual environment of a simulated football match. Things like the shadows on the stadium, the mole pattern of the grass, that 4-part shadow that you see in a night match under stadium lights that, it looks really cool, but it can interfere with visual clarity. Those were all included because they reflected specific feedback we got from our Accessibility Council and others, but it's all part of that core principle of removing any visual barriers to clear contrast. So we kind of tend to refer to it all under the banner of high contrast mode. So here are some of the actual accessibility settings in the game. Up top are some of the options we have available, some of which were in the game previously. But down here you see high contrast mode, as well as some other options I mentioned earlier. Things like the ability to turn off the stadium shadows or player shadows, or even just changing the mole pattern on the grass. since they could all potentially get in the way of seeing what's happening on the pitch. For high contrast mode itself, we made sure that there were plenty of different options. Full customizability is essential because there's so many different colors in a football match. There's a home team and an away team, home and away keepers, there's the referee, and there's also the ball, all of which could still need to be distinctive from one another. And we also wanted to make sure players could decide, do I just want the kit shaded or do I want the whole player shaded? Because for some people, seeing those hairstyles and skin tones also help them differentiate players in important areas like what foot am I playing with, what play styles do I have? So we didn't want someone to lose that if it was part of the experience that they valued. Now, this is an example of our game kind of at its worst, where we have major kit clash and all sorts of visual elements that could be obscuring things. Now, with all those settings turned off, this is the exact same match, but with the full high contrast suite. And so you can see just how easier it is to see what's going on. And we even have this feature where we chose to turn off the high contrast mode when you go into celebrations, because then you still get that feeling of seeing your team's jersey colors and things like that. So I'm just going to leave you with some of the comments that we received after the accessibility seminars. I feel like I'm stealing Ivona's thunder a bit by getting to put this all up here, but it really is a testament to how motivated people became toward accessibility after those sessions. And one last thing is I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to Ivona and myself speak, but I really want to emphasize just how critical it was for us to have accessibility specialists we could consult with at any time and who could validate that our designs were as effective and far-reaching as possible. Morgan Baker and Luke Hinu were indispensable, as were the many people across FC who came together to build these features. All the best. Thank you very much for listening to us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.